everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Love Bomb Chat series. I am joined for the very first time tonight by Nicole from the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast. We have actually never talked before. This is our first time talking and meeting, so that's kind of exciting. I always kind of love when that situation happens live and you're like, we're just going to feel this out and see what happens.
Like, let's do it live. Let's do it live. No, we were talking a little bit in the green room. It's so fun to finally meet you, and we've been emailing back and forth and stuff. I'm so excited to be here. This is awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to have you. So you are one half of the Fantasy Fangirls, because it's fangirls, it's not just Fantasy Fangirls.
Thank God.
Yeah, and you run this podcast with your sister Lexi, and you guys are pretty new to this whole podcasting game, like collectively, but you have been podcasting, it seems like, independently for a while, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I had my own podcast for just shy of 5 years. I think I put out like 220 episodes, something like that. And it was a solo show. It was a very different show. It was very, very different. It was more like along the lines of like neuroscience, kind of more. I always hesitate to say personal development because that can be like really rah. It was a lot more about like, why are we the way that we are? And that's where my background is. And I loved it. It was so fun. But doing a solo show is way hard. And so when Lexi and I started reading these books together, and she was like, hey, do you want to do a podcast together? I was like, no, absolutely not. I already do one. That's so much work. But
That's so funny.
She very quickly talked me out of it.
That was completely misconstrued in my brain, where I was like, oh, well, Nicole is probably the one that wanted to do a podcast.
Not at all.
She has a background in podcasting. That's so funny.
Well, because also like reading had just become a big escape for me, right? Like I just rediscovered my love of reading, and it was the non-work thing that I did. I'm a very type A person. I tend to not stop working unless I'm forced to. Like that's
I was
kind
gonna
of
say, I feel like that was an Enneagram slip.
It was
you're an Enneagram 3. Yeah.
You know me so well already.
There it is. Yeah, 100%. So.
Absolutely Enneagram. Yes. So I'm definitely an Enneagram 3. But along those same lines, like I like this new love of fantasy and reading and all this stuff. And it was with, where is it? That book right there. With Akatar. It was like, I came alive again, and I was like, I cannot make this work, because if I make it work, then I'm gonna lose control, and I'm gonna get all crazy and all my bullshit that I do with that. But Lexi talked me into it really quickly, and luckily it has never felt like work. I won't say never. It's like I'd say 99% of the time it does not feel like work, which is awesome.
Yeah, and you guys have kind of pivoted to that, to making it a full-time thing for you both, which is really amazing, because Lexi is a stay-at-home mom, I believe, with 2 very young children. So like, good to her, because I have one child who's almost 2, and it is exhausting with just one. I can't even imagine having 2. Every time she mentions she has multiple small children, I'm like,
honestly,
like girlfriend deserves all the applause, because good for her.
She's my biggest like inspiration. How she does, because she's right now phasing out of her other job. And so she was phasing out of that. She was working that part-time, it was full part-time basically. And then she was full stay-at-home mom, always with 2 little kids. And then we started this adventure, and we're working 12 to 16-hour days. And it's just like, I honestly, how she didn't keel over and die, I'm so impressed. She is one of the most amazing women in the entire world.
You find this, it's not the case for all women, but I definitely found it for myself, because my channel originally started as a podcast with my husband that we started a month after my daughter was born. And it's like this weird thing where, at least for me, I was so consumed in this mom bubble that I was like, I need something else. And I was just like, I love talking about fantasy and TV. So like, let's do it together, because then that way we're doing something together and we're spending time with each other. And that's kind of how it started. And I was just like, I just want to do that. And I had no idea how much work was in podcasting. Like people do not realize how much work it takes to make a podcast. And it's kind of a similar thing when you make videos for YouTube and so forth, but it's just a completely different style of editing, because I feel like videos can be a little bit more fluid in the sense that you can have those pauses in them. A lot of the time pauses are in there for dramatic effect. And in a podcast, you're like, I need to get rid of every every pause, everything that's like unintentionally said. It needs to be clean. So it's so much work, and you do not realize it until you try.
So I had my other show for 5 years, right? And I was really lax with the editing for that. And actually I had someone even editing for me, and I was like, I don't care about like leave the pauses, like it's fine, whatever. And then for whatever reason, when we started Fantasy Fangirls, I was like, there will be no there will be no pauses. Like I spent, because like the episodes are like 2.5 hours each, right? I'd say two to 2.5 hours each. And I, at the very beginning, would spend up to 18 hours per episode editing that. And finally, our executive producer had to sit me down and be like, Nicole, chill.
Like,
chill.
Too much. He's
like, pull it back. And luckily we now have like thank you. That means a lot. And I've come a long way in my editing, and now I'm able to edit an episode probably in like 6 to 8 hours, which it still sounds long, but considering they're 2.5 hour episodes.
It is long. I mean, that's part of the whole thing. Yeah. Josh, my husband, sat me down at one point. He's like, you can leave the odd in it.
Yes.
It's like, it's not going to hurt you. And I was like, not convinced. And then by that point, we moved on, and he wasn't doing it with me anymore. And then I made it a whole booktube channel instead. So it became a completely different method. Yeah. I edited
oh my gosh.
For YouTube shorts. Yeah. It's just, it's a lot of work. So kudos to you for doing that. But before we continue talking about podcasts, I try to ask people whenever they come on, if you have read something recently, or if you are reading something currently that you really love, and if so, what that might be. I have a feeling I might know what it is for you.
The fun nature of my job is I'm at least reading 5 books at once, and that's like a normal day, which I never thought that would be the case. So I'm right now reading One Dark Window, and I just started that, so I don't feel comfortable. Like I've heard really good things. I just don't have my formal opinion on that one yet. I'm currently doing the tandem read of Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn for Throne of Glass. It's my second read of this series, and I'm actually enjoying it way more. Not to say that I didn't on the first read, but I'm really getting immersed in the story a lot more on the second. And then I'm also reading I'm also listening to the dramatized version of Fourth Wing. I just got part 2 today, and I'm really liking that. And then of course I'm reading A Court of Thorns and Roses for the deep dive, which means I'm always simultaneously reading Mist and Fury, because there's so much parallels there. So
so much,
to answer your question, what I'm actually really enjoying right now, I'd say like my like chill, laid back, like I'm listening to this just for enjoyment. I'm also an audiobook person. I don't really like physically read very much because I'm dyslexic, and that would be hell for me. So I do a lot of audiobooks, and I'd say the tandem read right now is what is bringing me so much freaking joy. I live in Oklahoma.
It's funny you say that, because I came across Fourth Wing first. Like, I was not a romantic reader at all. And then my best friends who I've known, my best friend I've known since I was 5, and I'm now 34. So I've known her for a really long time. And she kept saying to me, I think you're really gonna like, no one said.
I'm not from Oklahoma, but I lived in Oklahoma for about 4 years. Yes. Not from there.
She's from Colorado.
It's very snowy. Very snowy right now.
Yeah, so I've heard. Came up and she kept saying to me, she's like, you need to read Fourth Wing. I was like, no, like that's not real fantasy. Like, I'm not gonna read that. And then, I got into this like really hoity-toity attitude where I was like, there's real fantasy, and then there's less real fantasy, and the less real fantasy is romantic fantasy. And then my friend was like, please just read it and then see how you feel, and then you can make these wrong opinions. And I was like, fine, whatever, I'll read it. So picked up Fourth Wing, had a freaking blast, and was like, oh, I'm so in. Like, I'm so in. This is a great time. And then was like, all right, I need all the information. Like, I need it now. And that was how I came across your guys' podcast, because you were still in the midst of your deep dive.
Yes.
So I was like, all right, cool. Because I had just finished both of them. I finished Iron Flame, and I was like, I have all the information, so like I can listen to all the podcasts, and like it'd be fine now. And then you guys were talking about how when you were done this, you were going to read ACOTAR. And I was like, well, I guess I now have to read ACOTAR. And
yes.
picked up ACOTAR and read all 5 books in a week, like was obsessed.
Wait, were you the person in the Discord who was like, I just finished all 5 books in 1 week? Because I read that and I was like, what?
That was me, because I was like, I do not know what to do with myself anymore. Because first of all, I'm now having an identity crisis because like, what? And then secondly, I was like, what else is there for me to read? And a few people, because I made a video and I titled it on my channel, I hated ACOTAR so much that I read all 5 books, like very sarcastic, like, come on, I absolutely loved it. And people were like, you really need to read Throne of Glass, which I then ended up reading Throne of Glass. I will say for me personally, I then followed that with Crescent City. I ended up reading all of Sarah J. Maas in 1 month. Like it was a very SJM heavy month. And Throne of Glass is my least favorite, but I will say I did the tandem read as well with those 2 books in the series. I can never remember the order. I know Tower of Dawn is like the book that I was very unhappy with when I was reading it. So I was like, I'm really glad that I tandem read this because it made it a much more enjoyable experience for me. So I 100% get what you're saying, because one of my friends who I kept messaging her during this experience because she's read all of SJM, and I was like, I need a soundboard here. Like I just need to tell people what my feelings are as they happen. And I was saying to her, I'm tandem reading this. She's like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I'm so sad I didn't do it that way. So I think the general consensus for most people now is they do really prefer that tandem read, which is such a weird way to read.
It really is. And like, because since I'm listening to it on audiobook, you have to be very mindful of what chapter you're on. It's very hard.
I did too.
But Lexi's doing that right now. She's, I think, a few chapters just behind me. And she's reading Throne of Glass for the first time, and she's loving Throne of Glass. I love the romance. I love the spice a little bit more, which Throne of Glass, like the romance element, just kind of does take a little back seat. So that's why ACOTAR is definitely my favorite SJM universe. I'd say Crescent City's, I really like Crescent City. There were some issues that I had with book 3 that definitely knocked it down a few pegs, but I still really, really like it. But I was going to say, in regards to the tandem read, we did a poll on our Instagram stories, just being like, because this was right before I started. I was like, do tandem read or not to tandem read? What do I do? Basically. And people had opinions about it. And I'd say about 75% of our audience was like, yes, tandem read. 25 was like, no, don't. I'm really glad I did it. And it's a reason that I'm doing it again on the second time. It is harder. You're having to deal with a lot more storylines at once, but there is a slowness to one of the books that just kind of breaks it up a little more. Plus, one of the books ends on a huge cliffhanger that if you had to read all of the other one, you'd be like, oh God. And I really liked it. Wait, my wife loves Fourth Wing, but wasn't a fan of ACOTAR. Okay, so actually, I hear this one a lot because because Fourth Wing is so action-packed. I mean, you drop into that book and you are walking the parapet, basically. Like, there is no build up. It's also really contemporary language. The magic system is really easy to grab a hold of. Like, not to say that it's like it's dumbed down. It is just a really good read and easy to grasp onto. Whereas ACOTAR, the writing style is a lot more lyrical. Also, the first book is slow until about 2/3 of the way through.
It is.
And a lot of people don't love that.
Series. It's really I keep telling people now that I've been talking about it nonstop, and it's like now part of my identity. I'm like, do not believe that the first book is indicative of the rest of the series, because it really is. The first book is a fairy tale retelling, whereas the rest of the series really becomes a fantasy story, I feel like. And it's interesting. So please continue with what your recommendation would be.
Well, so my rec, honestly, for like another book series, I'm still kind of noodling on that. A book series, because you're saying here that she loves like the fast-paced nature of it. You actually might be better to answer this question, Laura, because I'm trying to think of like other fast-paced ones. Crescent City was on the top of my list. It is a lot, like, it's a dense read. That is a dense
read, but at the same time, too, I feel like because the language is also very contemporary, it's urban, so it is a contemporary setting, and shit kind of hits the fan really early in Crescent City. Like, there is a very big event that happens at pretty much the beginning of the book. And it's not super spoilery because I think it's even like on the back of the book as the
I think it's like chapter 5. It's like super early.
It's really early. And I will say for me, Crescent City took about 200 pages for me to get really invested into the book. But also it was because I was just on such an SJM high at this point that I just finished Kingdom of Ash, which I thought was a very good conclusion to Throne of Glass. And then I jumped into this and it felt very jarring. So I was sitting there going like, I don't know if it's for me. But then I really started to like the dynamic between Bryce and Hunt because it almost felt kind of buddy cop-ish, which I really enjoyed. So if you like the found family trope, or if your wife likes the found family trope, if she likes more contemporary setting, contemporary language, fast paced, I would say that that's good. Even though it is fast paced at the beginning, it is 3 large books. So it's not like super fast.
Well, and someone in the YouTube comments also said From Blood and Ash is literally the book I was about to, I think I know who that is, actually. I think I know exactly who that person is. From Blood and Ash is a great one as well. It's definitely not as fast-paced as Fourth Wing, but it's definitely faster paced than A Court of Thorns and Roses. And the spice is spicy. Those are some spicy peppers there. And it's so good. I
just read those. I just read them. And I read From Flesh and Blood, and I read From Blood and Ash. I preferred From Flesh and Blood of the 2 series.
Cool.
Personally. Yeah. Have you read both? Or
I haven't yet. We were so fortunate to interview Jennifer L. Armentrout on the podcast. And I asked her, I was like, what is your preferred reading order for people? Because I had just finished, I binged all of From Blood and Ash when we heard we were going to interview her. I was like, oh God, I got to read these books. And I loved them. And I asked her, I was like, what is your preferred reading order for people? And she goes, definitely read From Blood and Ash first. Because then you get a lay of the land, really, of like the lore, the magic, the continent, all this kind of stuff, and then move to the Flesh and Flyers, the Flesh and Flyer. Yep,
I know.
Series.
So it does not roll off the tongue.
I talk for a living. It's great. But I definitely think that's definitely on my TBR to read because I keep on just hearing these incredible things from it. I do think it's definitely much more like high fantasy. I don't know if I'd even call it high fantasy. It's the lore is loring. It is dense. It is dense lore.
Yeah, it is very lore heavy.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think some people love that. And I don't think it sacrifices a pacing. It doesn't sacrifice slower pacing though for the lore, at least for Blood and Ash.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I started reading them, because it was when I finished Crescent City, I was like, well, what do I read now? And because at this point I was like, well, I'm just going to read from fantasy until I die, basically. Like this is now apparently all exclusively that I read. And I was asking people, I was like, what do I read? And they were like, From Blood and Ash. I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And when I told my friend I was reading it, she was like, oh, do you know about the reading order? And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, she's like, go to the website for Jennifer R. Armentrout. And I was like, okay. And on the website, it is, you read the first 3 books From Blood and Ash. Then you read the first book of Flesh and Fire. And then you go back to Blood and Ash. And then you go back to Flesh and Fire. And I was like, okay.
Honestly, I like that. I could see that working. I know a little bit about the Flesh and Fire series, so I think I could see that working really. I might try that next time I do a reread of this series.
It was interesting because the 3rd From Blood and Ash book ends on a very big cliffhanger, and you're like, what? And then you go to a prequel book, and you're like, okay. And I was so mad at the reading order. Like, I was mad at her for making me do this. Like, it was one of those things that I was like, I'm going to trust your stupid process, but I'm not happy about it. And I opened the book and I started reading and I was like, oh, I love it. Like, I loved the prequel story more than the original trilogy story, and found myself just so immersed with those characters that I had a blast. And in terms of the relationships that were written, I love Sarah and Nyktos from the prequel. Like, it's just 10 out of 10 perfection for me. I love them.
Oh, okay. You're making it go higher up on my TBR, which is saying something because that's a long ass TBR. So
it never ends. Like, this is what people were telling me when I joined YouTube. They were like, get ready to have a never ending TBR. And I was like, I be fine. And I'm like, no, it just goes on forever and ever.
True. We literally have like an entire Discord channel just devoted to book recs. And I pop in there pretty often because I just like to see what people are reading. And holy God, Sammy, it is like literally like boom, like it goes out for forever. And right now I'd say like if I'm looking at like just like what's next, obviously One Dark Window, I'm reading that. I've just like literally just started that. But other books I hear really good things of. Powerless, I hear really good things about. Scarlet St. Clair has a great series about like a Persephone and Hades retelling that we were really fortunate to get some art copies of, and so I really want to read those for sure. I'm like, there's so many hours in the day, and I feel like I can't read all the books I want to.
I know. It's really, you get just pulled in, right? And like for me, I am a big binger, if it's not entirely clear based on the fact that I read all 4 books in a month. But like I have started gravitating towards series that are complete just because that way I can power through them. Like I love having all the information available in my brain as I go into the next book. And I know that books aren't published that way, in the sense that like when the 3rd, 4th Wing book comes out, I'm going to be rereading both of them before, so I have all the information like ready to go, because that's just how I am as a reader. I need all of that at my fingertips.
It's funny. I used to be someone who loved completed series. I don't like incomplete circles, just give me anxiety. But since starting Fantasy Fangirls, I've really come to terms because I've really enjoyed the theorizing element of it.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's so fun. Like, it's so much fun to be in that zone of it. And so I think that really made the incomplete series. Like, I mean, literally, I'm foaming at the mouth for whenever Empyrean 3 drops. We still don't know a date, and I'm dying. But like, whenever that does come out, I'm so excited for not only the fandom, but just like to get the theories confirmed. Like, where are the Isle Kingdoms? I need to know. Like all of these.
What is that second signet? Like, what is it? Like,
oh my God,
we gotta know.
I have so many ideas.
And it's so fun. Like my husband and I, when we started dating, Game of Thrones had just released the 5th book. And we would talk for hours about theories about that book. And like, he lived in Philadelphia and I lived in Canada, so we had quite a ways of distance between each other, and we did long distance. So like most nights we were just talking and like catching up, and it was theorizing on fantasy stuff. And when we would visit with each other, like our friends lived in Baltimore, so we would do road trips to go see them, and the whole drive we would be just theorizing about fantasy, which is why when I made that podcast with him, I was like, well, this is basically what we do, just we're not recording it, so I'm just gonna literally stick a microphone in front of us and hit record, and then spend the next 15 hours editing it, but it's fine. So it was just one of those things that I ended up loving talking about fantasy. And that, I agree, is just, you find your people, right? You don't really realize it, but just like having those theory conversations, you're like, oh, other people like doing this too. And it's honestly,
that's been one of the best parts about this journey. Like, no shit. Like, that has been the best part about this journey is getting the community aspect. Cause like a year ago, I didn't even know book talk was a thing. I didn't know about ACOTAR. I'd never heard of it. Like, and finding I mean, you know, we talk about like the found family trope in books, and it's like, I really do feel like, obviously found family, I'm doing this podcast with my sister, her and I are closer than we ever have been before. We never thought we would be business partners, let alone podcasters. Like, this was just so beyond our scope. But getting to be one with the community, getting to talk to people about theories, getting to be in the Discord to talk about books and what they're reading, and like, that has been so like I have truly, my husband says this to me pretty regularly. He's like, you are more alive in the past 6 months than I've ever seen you. Like, and it's just, that's awesome. And it's truly because of just like, oh my God, I feel like I found my people. I feel like I'm like one with people now, finally. And it just, it feels so good. And I know I'm not alone in that journey. Like, a lot of people found reading, and then suddenly they're becoming alive in this whole new way because they're getting to talk to people about these different worlds. And I think that there's such a, there was such a, I'm going to put a past tense on that. There was such a like bad stigma around escapism, and, you know, like, oh, you're just like going, I mean, I think it was even literally, Professor Sprout recently from Harry Potter was like, oh, you guys should be over this by now. Like, and I'm like, no, like, I'm not going to be over this. And I think that that's what's so beautiful about these worlds is we're able to use our creative brains. And like Lexi actually said this on a podcast the other day that we were on, we're able to use our creative brains in a way that us millennials, us, like mid-age people, we're not able to use it very often. We're thinking about healthcare. We're thinking about foot snowstorms and I hope I have power tonight. Like, we're thinking about these really real world things that, let's be honest, are not really fun all the time. Yeah. And the fact that we get to just escape into these worlds and have fun, that is what I think a huge draw to this community is. And I think that's why it's blowing up so much right now.
Big time. I mean, it's so funny because escapism as an ideology is something that's been around for thousands of years. Like literally. The Romans have mosaics and murals of escapism in Pompeii that have been excavated. Like in Rome, in Augustus's house, the murals are all escapism because the whole idea was that if you lived in the city, you wanted to be in the country. And if you lived in the country, you wanted to be in the city. It was like people have always wanted what they don't have because it helps alleviate the burdens of everyday life. Yes. And I mean, I feel like for a lot of people, COVID kind of reintroduced them to reading and brought in a whole new wave of fantasy readers because of the fact that we were so isolated and we were stuck at home and people thought, how can I get out of this? I'm going to jump into a story that literally takes me to another world. Yes. And it really became this big thing for people. And it was interesting because I really didn't know that, people used the internet to talk about books. Like it was just like people send each other GIFs or GIFs and memes, and that's like the internet. And you send like a work email. Cool. And then my husband and I were watching the Wheel of Time show, and we were like, you know what? I wonder if anyone has done a comparison of the show and the books. We looked on YouTube, Bookborn's channel came out, and I was like, let's watch that. And I was like, oh shit, like people actually use YouTube for this. Like that's a thing. And that's when I looked at him and I was like, well, we should do that, and it just kind of took off from there. But I started my channel as a book channel in January of 2023. And it's been so great just getting to know people. Like this for me, it has been the most fun part of it. Like I always tell people, I'm like, yeah, making videos and stuff is fun, but like talking to people, that's really the joy of joining a community like this because you really do find your people. And I was joking with my friends that made me read Fourth Wing because once I read Avatar and I was like, well, like now I need to know everything that there is to know about this. I still use Facebook because I'm an old person, and I logged into Facebook and I found this Avatar group, which is like the best group on the internet. I swear to God, it is.
What's the name of it? Do you know? Off the top of your head?
Avatar shit posting.
Oh, I know exactly that one.
Yes, it is the best group. So and oh my God, I said to my husband, I'm like, this is my tribe. Like I have found my people. This is them as a collective. I've arrived.
Yes. Yeah.
It's literally just so funny.
Sometimes I'll just like scroll through those posts because they are witty. Like I think I'm funny. So I go in there and I get schooled. I get absolutely
they are
schooled.
So funny. I spend at least half an hour in that group every single day because it is just so uplifting, and I leave my scrolling journey feeling like I'm on an absolute high because it is so fun. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of what it creates, right? Like you get so attached to these stories, these characters, these authors that you go out and you seek these groups of people that feel similarly, and you really do find community. It can be in a very non-committal way, like that group where it's kind of just like commenting funny things about these books, but in a loving way. Or it can be that what you've done, and really that you create an entire community that people rally around you, which is just such an interesting experience. Right?
It's funny. I've never been someone who just like kind of dips her toe into someone. Like my husband calls me deep dive queen. Like if I read something, it becomes my entire personality. Like it's suddenly everything I've ever wanted. And 100%. It's just, I think that But I think that's such a huge draw for a lot of people, especially like, women. We find these female main characters and we like lose ourselves in them, and not in a bad way. I mean that in a very, very good way. Like I have on my laptop, I have 2 different quotes. I have one from the Valkyries, and then I have one from Violet when she gets her signet. And it's like those quotes remind me so of like the power that I have in myself. Like I know that sounds so freaking cheesy, but I really mean it. Like, bye. But I do think that there's so much to tapping into that. Like, oh, that's right. I am infinite. I am the rock beneath the waves crash, or whatever the quote is. I don't have it right in front of me, but I think that it's important to remember to tap into that for ourselves. And I think that some of us lose that in the day to day. I know I definitely did. Like, I mean, I was an entrepreneur for 5 years prior, and it was really hard to get up off the ground some days and just like, keep going. And it's quotes like that, and it's reminders like that make it so easy to get up every single day with Fantasy Fangirls when things are hard. Like we've had our trials definitely with building this business, but it is like on those days, it's the community, it's those reminders of who, I want to be like Violet today. I think that's like, those things are so important to tap into.
100%. So were you guys big readers growing up as a family? Like, is your family read, or is this kind of something that you guys came to later? Because I know both of you really love Harry Potter.
So Lexi was a big reader growing up. Like she was big Harry Potter. She even like had her own, I think wrote her own website for Harry Potter. This is like back in like the 2000s when websites weren't really a thing. Like she's amazing. And then she went on to like do all the AP classes and like all like the really smart person classes for literature. I did not. Reading was not fun for me. I did not enjoy it very much.
Well, if you're dealing with dyslexia, that can be really difficult.
It was hard. Like it was something that reading for me never came naturally. And it wasn't until I actually read Twilight growing up and I was like, oh, like I can actually find fun in this. Like this is actually really enjoyable. But then I lost it for a long time. Then I started reading just like nonstop personal development, neurology, all that kind of stuff for like 10 years. And that nothing kills the joy of reading than self-help. I'm just going to say that. But after like I'm trying to think when I did read like YA stuff off to the side. Like that was kind of my like, oh, like maybe I'll read this. And like I'd go through like little phases here and there where I'd read. And by saying reading, I'm saying audiobooks. But you mentioned Harry Potter. I wanted to bring it back to that. So Lexi read Harry Potter over and over and over growing up. I watched the movies and pretend to read the books. I like literally sit there with the book and not read. like that was literally my MO. Be with my friend. Yes, absolutely. She is so analytical. She is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. I just was not that growing up. I think I've tapped into that a lot more with Fantasy Fangirls, thank God, because or else I'd be screwed. But with Harry Potter, it wasn't until I discovered the audiobooks, which are phenomenal. And I actually didn't read those until 2020. So talking about the pandemic, that was when I first read the audiobooks. And from then I just had them on loop basically. And there was actually a podcast that deep dived Harry Potter kind of in a similar, like not even kind of very much in a similar format as Fantasy Fangirls. And I love that podcast. It's still one of my favorites to this day. And I just started enjoying analytical reading and just started enjoying like that more fantasy style more. But it wasn't until I read ACOTAR over the summer, like last summer, that it was like reading was nonstop. Like that was just like, that was the ship that sailed me away to Fantasyland. But again, I went through phases and it really wasn't until audiobooks became a huge part of my life that I was like, I like this. This is good.
Yeah. I didn't ever listen to audiobooks until last year. And I really just couldn't, I found it difficult to get into. I couldn't concentrate on it. I'm a former teacher and I taught at a school for kids with dyslexia. So I'm very well versed in getting children to read with dyslexia, and audiobooks were a big part of that.
Yeah.
So like I was always a big proponent of them. I just found for me, I was like, I don't like these narrators for fantasy. Like I just don't like them. And I was going through this really big phase of reading Brandon Sanderson last year. Like all I read was Brandon Sanderson, and he had the same 2 narrators for most of his books, and they are really well beloved by a lot of the fantasy community. But for me, I was like, I don't like them. And finally, I started reading a series by this guy named Joe Abercrombie. He writes grimdark fantasy, and his narrator is a man named Stephen Pacey, and he is to date the best audiobook narrator that I've come across.
Ooh.
And he himself sounds like a graphic audio. I've got my cat coming here trying to knock everything over. But he sounds like a full cast of people. And I was so enamored with how, hi, are you coming over? You can come here. Thank you. With how he did and narrated these books that I was like, oh, maybe I do like audiobooks. I haven't found the right narrator yet.
Yeah.
And I have now since found that like I can pretty much listen to anybody. Like they have to be really, really bad for me to not be able to listen to them. Like either they're mispronouncing names of people or places and stuff like that. But otherwise I'm like, no, I'm pretty much good now. So I don't know if it just like took time or if it took the right person, but I now love audiobooks. It's generally my biggest form of consuming literature is via audio.
I think it takes the right person because for me, it was the Harry Potter audiobooks that is an entire cast of characters done by one man. It is actually, it is phenomenal.
It Stephen Fry that does those ones?
There's two. There's Stephen Fry and then there's one other. I think I listened to the other guy, but I'm totally forgetting his name off the top of my head. But he's phenomenal. And like I aspire to be as good of a voice actor as that man. Like he's incredible. But I love Elizabeth Evans also. She's one of my favorites. She does Crescent City and Throne of Glass for Sarah J. Maas. She's just insane. I know a lot of people didn't, but I love the audiobook narrator Rebecca Soler for Fourth Wing. I just think
she did a good job.
I think that she originally had a cold, which was a really big bummer. And you're talking to a microphone. It's really hard not to hear that.
Yeah.
But then I don't know if she re-recorded it or if they edited it out. I don't know what they did, but they did something where they re-uploaded the audio and it's all her voice not sick now. And it's phenomenal. I mean, it is so like I think how she does Xaden is how she does Xaden and Taryn. Like she knows how to do sass, and I love that about her. Oh, there's some mean people here. Oh my goodness. Honestly, regarding both women, Nicole, so like I literally both Elizabeth and Rebecca are phenomenal. Yeah. I also really like Jennifer Ikeda, who does.
I do too.
I'm really bummed because they switched narrators from it was Akatar, Akamaf, and then Akawar. It was a new person, which she wasn't bad.
I thought it switched for Akamaf. Like I thought she just did Throne of Glass and then it switched.
No, she just did A Court of Thorns and Roses and Akamaf, and then but I will say she ramped it up for Akamaf, and I think she did.
Yeah.
I mean, also Akamaf is just a ramped up book.
It's so good.
It's so good. I think she just does Rhysand perfectly. I mean, like Rhysand is her voice in my mind. But then they did switch to. I'm totally forgetting her name off the top of my head for a Court of Wings and Ruin and for A Court of Frost and Starlight. And it's not that she was bad by any means. She did a great job. It's just my head was so Jennifer Ikeda. And then Stina Nilsson did Silver Flames. And I think she did great because Nesta's a hard person to narrate.
It's hard. Stina also does the From Blood and Ash series.
Just Poppy perfectly.
Yeah,
perfectly.
She does. And I will say it's so funny because now I'm used to the Scottish accent as well. I'm so sorry.
Nicole, yes.
But I had a moment where because I associated Stina with Nesta so definitively that when I started listening to From Blood and Ash, I was like, whoa, it took me a solid minute. Which I know a lot of people were talking about with the graphic audio for Fourth Wing, because if they've listened to the graphic audio for Akatar, it's the guy that voices Lucian.
Yes.
So I was like, I have not done graphic audio for Fourth Wing yet, but I do have all of the graphic audios for Akatar because I bought the physical copies, the regular audiobooks, and then the graphic audios because obsessed. And I was like, oh, I don't know how I would be able to, if I could picture or listen to Xaden being Lucian, because in my brain, he's very definitively Lucian.
Yes.
Because I love Lucian. Like, I am hardcore team Lucian. I love him so much. And on my third reread of Akatar in a month, I have decided that Lucian does not get the love that poor Lucian deserves.
He doesn't. Lucian,
So,
I have a hot take coming on the podcast, and it was I think Lucian is truly the most tragic character in all of ACOTAR. And
yes.
Lexi, I don't know if she doesn't agree with me or she just doesn't fully agree with me. There's two different versions of that very clearly. But with how Lucian gets done dirty in Aka War and then especially in Silver Flames and beyond. So that's one of the things I'm so excited for when it comes to ACOTAR. I call it ACOTAR 6 because I count the novella as a book. But some people call it ACOTAR 5. Like, I'm so excited for that book because I do think it's going to have a lot more Lucian in it, ideally. But I'm also nervous because I want my boy to be so happy and I'm scared he's not going to be. Right, also, Sawyer is played by Tamlin's. What, Sammy? Are you serious? That broke my brain.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. For some reason, it's telling me that like none of my stuff is plugged in, but it is.
Oh, so I love it when that happens. So terrifying.
Really?
That just broke my brain.
So, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
So I'm listening to the Fourth Wing graphic audio right now, right? Why is like Liam sounds like he's 75. Like, I'm so confused. Like, that's my only thing with graphic audio is sometimes the and it's not always, but this is really the only character I've noticed is that sometimes the characters sound way, way, way older than they actually are. And it really took, because like Liam is one of my favorite characters in Fourth Wing. And I'm so sad that he sounds like an old man. Like,
right? This is part of my issue with, it was my big issue with audiobooks in the beginning, that I was like, I have a very definitive idea of how characters sound in my head. And when they don't sound like that, it's confronting to me personally. And it was like, I was personally offended by it. I was like, well, they shouldn't sound like that because they sound like this. But then when I listened to that Joe Abercrombie book, the Stephen Pacey took a character that I had a very clear idea of in my brain and revamped him, and I was like, oh no, that's way better than what I was thinking. And hi Daniel, thank you. And it was just one of those experiences that I was like, oh, narrators really can enhance the character experience if you're willing to kind of let them take you there type thing. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna let go a little bit and be less of a control freak of my audio listening experience and decide that maybe they know what they're doing. Yeah, they really do, honestly.
What's her name? Kayla Freitz. Kayla Freitz, I think is her name. Who voices Violet. Like, she is Violet now in my head. I don't like I've actually talked with her a little bit on social media. She's a gem of a human being. I feel very cool. But she is like, when I think of Violet's voice, I think of her voice, even though I love Rebecca Soler, and Rebecca Soler is still Violet to me, but she just does Violet in a way that I'm like, yep, that's exactly how Violet would sound. Absolutely. I think
I love that because I've definitely started to feel that way with the graphic audios for ACOTAR, where the voice for Rhysand specifically, I'm like, oh, that's Rhysand.
Yes.
Which is interesting because when I listened to it the first time, I was like, well, he's not British. Like, why wouldn't you get someone British to be Rhysand? Like, I feel like that's what it should be. Like in my brain, I was like, all the high fae are British. Like every single one.
I can see it.
Yeah. It's just like, they were meant to be very posh, right? So I was like, well, naturally they would sound British and like the rest of us would sound just like plebs and it would be fine. And that would be the difference and differentiating factor between the two of them. And I thought, that might be interesting too, in the fact that it would almost be like a regional accent, that those beyond the wall weren't British and those cast in Prithian were British.
Well, so this is back. I'm getting on my spices train, Jesus Christ. But literally in the very beginning of ACOTAR, it is mentioned how when Feyre was in her dad's office, there were people in his office who were of different accents. Like they talked in a different way and all this kind of stuff. Now, something I always need to remember is that Prithian is basically the UK. It's also like, it looks like the UK. The Night Court is basically Scotland. The Highburn is basically Ireland, which sucks to be Ireland. That's so sad. I love Ireland.
I know.
But there's this entire continent that we've barely touched. And on this continent, there's going to be buku bunches of accents. So I do wonder if like there's fairies and people, because there's a whole fairyland over on the continent. And so I do wonder if like a lot of the accents do come from there. Like, I don't know, but I'm almost like, is the next book series, because we know that she's writing a new book series, Sarah J. Maas, is it going to be the continent? Is it going to be Miriam and Draken's story? Like, there's so many different ideas of like, there's this whole vast part of this world that we have barely touched. So I could see that being part of it. I'm really hoping it's not. I'm hoping it's something different, but I could see that being like almost like a prequel.
Yeah, it was really interesting because when I listened to it the first time and read it, I ended up immersion reading Akhtar, where I had the ebook in front of me and I was listening to it as I went, which like was a first for me. And I did that initially with Fourth Wing, and I was like, oh, I can do this. And then I did it with Akhtar. And it kind of escaped me that they are a continent or like they're an island. I was like, oh, this is not the mainland. Like, you don't really catch on to that on your first read until you go back and you look at it and you're like, oh, they're like this small little territory that can't get their shit together and have been warring for like 500 years. Cool. And it's so ridiculous when you think about it. But also you then, like you said, you think, oh, there's all these possibilities for different stories if we want to look at it from over there, especially if we look at it from like where Lucian is at now in our story and stuff like that. Like, there's so many different options that you could go about it. So I do think it's really interesting. I am curious to see, because she did sign that new 4-book deal, Sarah J. Maas, with Bloomsbury. So I think she's signed for 7 more books at this point. And I know one of them is definitely a Crescent City 4 book, which will kind of be interesting to see, because there is definitely a lot of story left to be told in the Crescent City universe after where she left things in the 3rd book. Of course, like, there is a lot of stuff in Akatar that is left to be said. Throne of Glass is a concluded series, which is interesting.
Is it?
I think it is, personally.
I do think it is. Like, if you read Kingdom of Ash, you're like, this is done. However, she has alluded to the idea of expanding on Throne of Glass. And that makes me happy. I think that if she does, it's going to be in an Avengers Endgame style, where it's like the 3 worlds come together. That is what I am really hoping. That I hope it's not through a book series. Like, I hope it's not through Akatar 7. I don't think it'd be 6, but I'm really hoping that it's through like maybe Twilight of the Gods, which is assumed to be her next book series that she's covering. But who knows? Also, I could see that, like I mentioned, being a prequel series, more prequel style. There's so many options on where she could take this series. I am going to be curious because I think Akatar has 3, if not 4 more books. That includes 1 or 2. No, I think 1 novella. So we know that there's a lot more Akatar. And it makes sense. I think that's right, Sammy. Don't quote me on that. It's either 3 or 4, but the fact that many books, I mean, those are thicky boy books. Like, a lot happens in those books. So like, there's still a lot more of the story. Yes, Feyre is concluded, ? But we have Elaine. We have a whole new Nesta arc that is a possibility. We have Lucian. We have Azriel. We have all. I realized I did not do any spoiler tags, so I'm sorry, spoilers.
Okay.
But that I think is a huge. And also more, like, there's so much that we can explore with more, and what her powers are, what she could possibly be, her love interest, which we've got some theories on. So I think that there's so much more that they can explore in this world. And I get nervous sometimes when book series or just TV series in general go on too long, because sometimes it can get a little, you can lose the magic. And I trust Sarah J. Maas with literally a kidney of mine. I'd happily give her one. I'd rip it out of my body myself. But like, I think that I know she's got this. It's just me also foaming at the mouth. Ooh, yes, Nicole, absolutely.
So I wanted to talk about this. I am going to give a little spoiler warning right here that if you are not caught up on Akhtar, or if you are not wanting spoilers for Akhtar, I'm going to give you like 15 seconds to mute or leave or do whatever, because I came across a theory about these 2 And I posted it in that ACOTAR Facebook group just the other day because I was like, what do people think? Because I think it is a really fascinating theory. And I'm talking very slowly right now so that people will leave if they want to leave while I pull up this theory.
I'm so excited.
This is the theory. I saw it on Reddit and I'm going to start reading it now. So I've said for a while that I think Moore and Eris are mates and that Moore already rejected the bond. It would be a bummer for Moore. It would be a bummer that Moore wouldn't end the story with her mate, but I think it would be fitting that Moore would find love and happiness for herself and not be made to be in a relationship because of forces outside her control. I think she and Eris both know, and he left her in the woods that day because he knew if he brought her back to the Autumn Court, someone would recognize they were mates, and due to Autumn Court custom, he would enforce that she would be his property and his father would have never allowed him to leave. There is a point in Silver Flames where Eris senses that it was Moore who dropped Cassian off to talk to the band of exiles, even though she never came close to the castle. It would explain why he's still so angry that Moore slept with Cassian, even though he claims he doesn't want her. It would also explain why Moore seems so terrified of Eris. There's multiple times when Moore reacts to Eris with not just hatred, but fear. Why would she be afraid of him? She's more powerful than he is, and she has a circle of equally powerful people at her back. If she is Eris's mate, though, she's recognized by a lot of Fae culture, including her family and his, as Eris's property, and it could potentially start a war. I thought that was such an interesting theory because I know that SJM has really toyed with the idea of showing a rejected mated bond. I'm really gonna be pissed if it's to my boy Lucian. Like,
I would riot. Riot.
I am gonna have words with Sarah if this ends up being the case. So I thought when I came across that, I was like, that would be so interesting. Like, I really find that so interesting.
The only reason I'm not like jumping on board is because something that SJM hasn't done a whole lot of, but she does have in the background is representation and more coming out as bisexual, and her and Emery having I'll say like some very, very flirty subtext going on. I'm really that needs italics. Imagine everything I'm saying is in italics right now. But like I do imagine that if she were to have, and I know you're not saying that her and Eris end up together. I do like the idea of a rejected mating bond. I hope it's not to our boy Lucian. I would be so sad. But I do think that because of the representation that SJM is introducing more and more in the stories, and she's always had them. I mean, she even had them in Throne of Glass. So it's not to say that she's like just now starting by any means, but I think that would do this series a huge disservice just looking at it from a representation standpoint if her mate was male. And I love the idea of maybe her mate being one of the, it wasn't a queen, but it was someone who she fought with back in the war way back when, who ended up choosing someone else.
Drama or something like that.
I can't remember her name off the top of my head. It'll come to me at like 3 in the morning. But I could not tell you if I tried, like truly.
I feel like but in that vein. The human,
I love this idea.
Go ahead.
The human, LOL. But I love this idea, especially since she's mentioned how she prefers females. I could see her mate being of the female sex, and I think that would actually be awesome because we have yet to see a main character in an SJM series have a mate who is of the same sex. We've seen it in the background, but not in the forefront.
We do see it in the background, and the thing that I think she can still get away with it if she wanted to make Eris technically her mate, because the way that she has phrased it via Rhysand and Farah is that the mating bond is in place for procreation. Like, it literally has nothing to do with whether or not you two are actually going to like each other.
That's true. I mean, Pamela and his parents are prime example.
Exactly. And Rhysand's parents are also another prime example. It just has to do with the fact that the Cauldron thinks that will produce strong children. It does not come into play as to whether or not your souls are actually compatible with one another. The way that, of course, SJM has written a lot of the pairings is that they do end up having a romantic aspect to them as well as a physical reaction. Exactly. You'd make cute babies. So
the cauldron's like, matchmaker.
Survivable babies. Exactly. So I think it could be interesting in the sense that if she almost approaches it from a perspective of like, there are soulmates and then there's just mates, you know, like there's like a difference almost. Or you can approach it from the perspective of like who you choose to be your mate versus what the cauldron is telling you your mate is.
Okay, if we're looking at it from an element of really, and I know you mentioned this when you were reading off the theory, if we're looking at it from an element of choice and really highlighting how much choice has in the mate's destiny, like you yes, the cauldron, the mother or whatever is designing all these mates and but if you have the choice to choose something or someone else, I like it. I'm open to this theory. You're convincing me more and more.
Too, right? Because in my Akatar re-listen, I think it's Lucian. No, excuse me. It's Alice that says it to Farah that babies are so uncommon to the high fae.
Correct.
Right? And it's like that's why the mating bond is so important because those are typically the bonds that are gonna bring about children. And if it is naturally difficult to have children, like you're going to lean into that bond to kind of ensure that you're procreating, right? So, I mean, like it makes sense in that way, but it really would be interesting if you do look at it from the relationship perspective, because we have our one High Lord, right, who is married to a man in the Akatar series. I mean, Farah got pregnant faster than anyone wanted her.
Farah's like, fertile. Here's one thing I will say that actually something that just popped into my mind. And this is more of a throw in a glass thing. There is this element that you cannot stand it when your mate is in pain. Like you go unhinged. I mean, Hunt is another great example of that. You go unhinged. And Eris seeing more. Now, I don't know if this would work with the rejected mating bond. That's the fun question. But Eris seeing more with a giant nail coming out of her abdomen, which just, oh God, it kills me for more. Seeing that and walking away, would a mate be able to do that?
It's a good question, but also I think you have to look at it from the like perceptions of pain in the sense of, is short-term pain worse than a lifetime of misery? Would that be more painful for her?
You're getting analytic. You're getting right? I like that. Okay, you're getting terrified.
Yeah, I mean, like, is physical pain worse than a slow death of her soul? Because that's really what living in the Autumn Court would have been for Mor. It would have been a really slow death because she couldn't be herself in the Autumn Court, and like that's why when Rhys gives her father access, very loose asterisk there, to Valara, she's like, well, shit, like this is the end of my identity and the end of my being able to be my own person. So, I mean, could a decent person do that?
Is Eris a decent person?
Is Eris decent?
He is morally gray through and through.
Very morally gray. I also am very intrigued by Eris because he's intimated very many times, like, you all don't know what happened, and there's a lot more to that backstory. Another theory I saw when I shared that one, because I was like, tell me what you think, I'm so interested, like, because I think this is a really great theory. People are like, oh, I also think Eris is gay, and why he rejected the bond. And I was like, excellent. So like there's all of these different theories pertaining to them, and I'm here for all of them. So, because I think that would also be a really fascinating reason for them both to reject it, like, exactly. It's real juicy.
Okay, I'm way more on board if that's also a part of it. But also, like, would the cauldron mate people who are not sexually attracted? I mean, also if Eris is bisexual, that's different, but also if they prefer the same sex, then we're getting as a bisexual person myself, I am also getting confused. This is exciting. I like this.
This is part of the whole conversation of, does the cauldron actually care if you like each other? Like, or if you are attracted to each other, if the sole purpose is to procreate, like it gets into very layered territory, right? Where it's like, we can't really understand the cauldron because it's not a sentient being in the way that we understand sentience. But hello, glad you could make it. I mean,
honestly, it's driving me crazy. I need to know.
Me too. He keeps dropping these threads and breadcrumbs, and he's like,
he's
y'all
the
have
new
fun.
cereal. He's like, the cereal's dead. I'm gonna drop the tea, but you're gonna have to work for it.
About the cereal, the greatest character in Avatar.
I'm so sorry. Nicole just said Eris and Tamlin. Hold, please.
No.
Eris and Tamlin.
Another.
Can you imagine?
I think it might have been on your podcast actually, where you guys were talking about that you think he might have been with Cressida, and I was like, interesting. Yeah.
So Lexi has this like dissertation about Tamlin's ex being Cressida. Don't think it's his mate by any means, but Tamlin's ex being Cressida. There's a lot. I mean, it's like the outline section of that is just, so Lexi's purple in the outline, I'm blue. It's just purple for pages. It's awesome. I also love the idea of Tamlin and Rhys's sister, whether that's being mates or whether that's being a couple in some way. I'm not sure, but I love the idea of that. I don't think she's still alive. There's a lot of theories that are showing.
Either. A lot of people think she's still alive. I just don't
think so. Unfortunately, I wish, but I don't think so.
I feel with Rhys's abilities, he would have been able to suss that out. Hey, Evie, thanks for joining. Because that I just feel like he would have figured that out a lot sooner than would have been the case. But I just love how many theories there are. Like, it's so fun to really get into the minutia of it, because this is something that I myself fell into this category of thinking like it's basic fantasy. Like, there's not really much planning that goes into it. Like, it's very surface level. I'm not going to get as much out of it as I would like a high epic fantasy read. I was so surprised when I read Fourth Wing as to like how much shit she hid in there. I was like, what is going on? And then when you read ACOTAR, you're like, it's fine. And then you read ACOMAF and you're like, it's perfection. Like, it's so good.
It is. It's so, and that's why I love these stories, especially like to read them on the first read and then to read them on a reread. And then if you're like me, it's a reread and a reread and a reread. You just pick up all these little, that's why I know I could never write a book. Lexi's the writer between the two of us. I never want to write a book because that level of attention to detail, I don't know if I have that. That's insane. And it's so cool. And she definitely does. And it's like going back. I mean, even as I'm re-listening to Fourth Wing, there's this line where she mentions oh God, oh, it's so small. I totally forgot. Oh, it just fell out of my head. But those kinds of moments where you get to listen or read and hear these things that are just went over your head on first read or even second read. That's why I think this community is so great.
When I was reading Fourth Wing, that everything was written down and translated by Jacinia. I missed that the first time, and I was like, okay, that ups the stakes. Significantly.
Raises my blood pressure a little bit.
Oh my good Lord. Had no idea that was what I was going to be dealing with. It really took me by surprise with how much planning she put into those books. I was very, very pleased with it.
Same. I can't wait for book 3.
Oh, I know. I keep waiting to find out when are we going to get a release type thing, but we just...
I'm assuming it's going to be a while. I have no idea. I'm assuming it's going to be a while. I wish I had some inside knowledge.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be next year that we'll get it. I
could see either pre-holidays of this year or early February next year.
Which is when I think I'm thinking the next ACOTAR book will probably come out next year.
I doubt that they would do them close together. I'm sure that they're talking with how popular these two series are. But also, I don't know. I'm not in publishing, so I have no idea.
Me neither. But I
hope to God, this is a selfish thing. I hope that they don't release at the same time because then Lexi and I will never sleep.
I know. This is the thing. I have purchased earpods that I'm parenting as I'm listening to these books and I'm hanging out with my kid and I'm also oh my
yes.
as I'm listening to stuff because I'm just so engrossed with the stories and I can't separate myself from them because they're so fun.
It's so hard. They're so good. It's why we love it.
How many episodes do you have left, or have you finished recording your episodes for ACOTAR now?
Not yet. We are recording episode 5 tomorrow. So that's the episode with Summer Solstice and Tamlin and Feyre's first bang, bang, bangity bang.
Okay.
And then we have 3 more after that. So we're doing Under the Mountain basically in 2 episodes.
Okay.
Which makes me terrified, but I'm excited. And then we have, I think, 9 or 10 episodes for Akamath planned.
Okay. It's going to be so fun. It's just, it's such a good book. It's such a good book. I love it. I love it so much.
I can't wait. We're so ready to get to it. We're so ready.
I believe it. Yes, I too am very impressed because my husband and I are planning on doing a Song of Ice and Fire reread where we're going to be doing it kind of like you guys, where we're going to be doing a few chapters and videos to go with them because we've both been wanting to reread it for a really long time. And I'm a very analytical person. I'm very much like Lexi in that way. Like I have my master's in humanities. Like I'm a note taker type person, but I haven't taken notes while reading fantasy ever. Just because I had to do it so much for my academic life that I really divorced myself of doing that for my reading for pleasure.
Yeah.
So when I was talking to him about doing it, I was like, oh, I'm going to like get into it. You know, it's the bar is, it's going to be raised.
It humbles you. It really humbles you while you take notes while reading it. I've never felt more like hyper focused in my entire life while simultaneously like I know nothing Jon Snow. Like it is very the only way I can put it is it humbles you to a way that I never thought I would be humbled.
I am excited just because I haven't read like that ever. So I am really curious to see how it alters my reading experience and how I kind of get into it. So obviously like romantasy tends to be the genre of fantasy that you really lean into. Do you feel like now that you're getting back into a standard level of reading that you think you might branch out into other subgenres of fantasy, or do you think that you're really happy staying in your romantasy bubble for now?
I love my romantasy bubble so much, but I did just go see Dune, and I am a deep dive queen. I want to understand every single breath in those movies because they're so good. So I'm debating also reading those books. That would probably be the most dense. I've read a few Song of Ice and Fires, and then I kind of branched off of those. Lexi's definitely like the Lord of the Rings, Song of Ice and Fire type of reader. Whereas for me, I love reading, especially when I'm reading for fun, not reading for the podcast. Like, excuse me, if I'm reading for fun, it's much more like, something that I can just turn my brain off a little. Dune, yes. But also like I say I want to turn my brain off and then I'm like, let me read Dune. Like,
yeah, exactly.
But I also love like I'm a big sci-fi person also when it comes to TV shows. Like The Expanse is one of my favorite shows of all time.
Nice. And it's one of my husband's too.
So good. It's so good. And so like to read those books would be awesome. So I haven't really stepped into yes. I don't have my hands on them or my ears on them even, but I think if there was a subgenre, and I don't think this is a subgenre by any means, if there was another genre that I would move over to, I think sci-fi would be one. But I'm also just so happy in my little romantasy bubble. I love sex, and if it's on the page, I'm happy.
I mean, hey, good for you. I don't blame you. I'm now one of those
simple woman with simple needs. So
I am now one of those people where I'm like, turns out I am easy to please.
I love that.
So obviously you guys are going to be doing the entirety of ACOTAR for your podcast. And I know that's going to be the next several months. I would say probably like the next 6 months.
I'd say I'd probably even go more. We're looking at the majority of 2024 is what we'll say.
Okay. And then are you guys thinking you are going to branch out into a different author, or do you think that you'll stay with SJM?
I don't know yet.
I think you do.
We have an idea. We have a very short list of books that we would branch out to. It also totally depends on when ACOTAR 6 and Empyrean 3 come out. We have a short list. We've discussed said short list, and I think we've decided, but we're not ready to release it yet.
That's fair. I'll ask you off camera.
Branch that up. I don't even know if I think like the only person who knows is like our manager. I think that's the only person who we've like opened up to about it.
You guys you're looking at different things though, because you are interviewing different authors and things like that, like Jennifer Armentrout and stuff. So obviously like you are, even if you're not discussing it on your podcast, you are reading other authors in your spare time, which I mean is always great. I don't know, Evie, why did it do that? If there is a sci-fi equivalent to Romantasy,
hell, if someone figures it out, hit me up. I want to know. Like that would be amazing.
Someone write it. Romantasy in space.
In the outer space. Zero gravity.
Exactly. Right. I mean, you want to write your book. That's your title. There you go.
People would be like, Nicole did write this. Yeah.
That's just what the author is just Nicole wrote this.
Perfect.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I know that Lexi has said that she wants to write a book at some point when she, has time from mothering to like actually sit down and write, which I so get because I myself write. So I relate to her so much on that because like I'm forcing myself now to actually sit down and put fingers to keyboard because it's not pen to paper anymore. Let's be real.
No.
So I hope she gets time to do that because I mean, Dune is kind of a sci romantic. That is true.
That is true. It takes you a couple hundred pages to get there, but you know what? I like it. As far as
okay, sci-fi
it's gotta exist. I need a book title.
I think so.
But honestly, maybe this is my sign to read Dune. Honestly, I think that might be high up on my list. So good. The movies are so good.
I have not read it. I loved the first film that Denis Villeneuve did. The original Dune movie is not my favorite, but
I thought you were about to say the original Dune, and I was like, that's a choice. But yes, the new Dune movies are fun. I think that is book to movie adaptation at its finest. Like it is so wonderfully done.
Quite loved that.
As someone who's not read the book,
I get very picky about my adaptations. It's something that well, I say I'm easy to please with books. I am not easy to please with adaptations. I'm just not. But the thing that I've been watching lately is Shogun, and it's friggin' amazing. Like everyone should watch Shogun. Haven't read the book, but it's convincing me to. It takes place in 1600s Japan, and it is these feudal lords that are going at it because stuff. Like, I just don't want to talk more about it because it gives away too much of the plot that is introduced very early in the episode and it gets more detailed. But it is so beautifully filmed and it is actual Japanese actors. They're speaking in Japanese. You have to read subtitles when you watch this show. Like, it is committed, but it's half English, half Japanese. But it is 10 out of 10. Honestly, like, I love that so much. I would not agree with it. That Dune is a sci romantasy. That's very but in terms of like favorite adaptations, Good Omens by Neil Gaiman is always the one that I go to, and Lord of the Rings. Like I live for Lord of the Rings extended editions and all that kind of stuff. Not the Hobbit, but
gotta make that distinction.
I'm like, no, not those. The original 3. But yeah, I love a good adaptation when I come across one. It's hard not to.
It's few and far between, but the ones that are good for sure.
Oh yeah. And I'm so excited now that I have a kid and like when she's gonna want to start like watching these things, I'm like,
yeah.
My hope is anyway that she'll want to watch them and like she won't be that kid that goes, oh, mom and dad like those things, so I don't like those things. And I'm just like, you do you, girl, but at the same time, I'm like these things.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you and for Lexi because when those kids hit Harry Potter age, they don't have much of a choice.
Oh, she will not have a say in that one. Like she just straight up doesn't. My house is decked out with Harry Potter paraphernalia. Like her crib sheet right now is Harry Potter, and I'm like,
that's how my sister's kids are. Her first kid was a nursery that was Harry Potter themed, and it was so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean they don't get a say. So why don't you tell tell people where they can find you, because you're still, like I said, relatively new, but you guys are kicking ass and doing really great. So tell the world where they can find you guys.
We are everywhere, the Fantasy Fangirls. If you want to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, we are Fantasy Fangirls Pod. That is where we are definitely most active. We post a lot of funny memes and clips from the show. If you want to, hi, Sammy, you know where I am. You can also find us on any podcasting platform you listen to. We are Fantasy Fangirls, and we are also on YouTube. A lot of people like watching it on there because apparently we're very expressive. Oh, really? Yay!
That is how I found. Oh my God, you are so expressive. I remember the first time I watched it, was, how much caffeine has this woman had? I was like, girlfriend is getting so amped, and I was like pumped watching you. I was just thinking, like, it is 8:30 in the morning. Girlfriend is on it, like giving us a deep dive, and I'm here for it. Oh man. So if ever you need like a hype train first thing in the morning, definitely recommend watching them on YouTube, because you will feel very amped for the rest of
that
your
means
day.
a lot. Thank you. I love
actually espresso in the water bottle.
This is actually just straight crack. Thank you very much. Like, this is water, just to be clear. This is water.
Oh man, I don't know if I link to you guys in the show notes. If not, I will do it in the next few minutes so that people can find you here on YouTube. But thank you for meowing as I'm speaking. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. This was so fun, and I'm sad Nicole Lexi couldn't join you. But
you're good. My mom does the same thing. You're fine.
It's one of those things. I swear to God, once you have children, like your brain, I call my daughter my cat's name and vice versa at least 6 times a day. And I'm like,
my mom calls Lexi's daughter Nicole, and she's like, that's not right. And I'm like, no, it's not.
No, it's not. Yeah. I always used to laugh when my grandmother would go through every single person's name until she got to me. And I'm like, I'm now that person. I really can't complain about it a whole lot, but it's, yeah, exactly. Wrong daughter.
Literally.
For me, I'm looking at it and going, wrong species. Like, it's really not even close.
That's amazing.
Exactly. But anyway, thank you again for coming on. This was so fun. I would love to have you back whenever you want to come chat ACTAR with me and deep dive it. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. If you're catching on a rewatch, let us know down in the comments if you have read any of these romantasy books, what you think of them, if you have theories for Eris and more, if you are shipping any of the stuff that we were saying, because I want to know all the theories. Yes. And as always, feel free to share what you love with people, because that's how you find your people, like we did tonight. Or you might find a cat that's meowing at you really loud from across the room. You never really know what you're going to find. So all in all, thank you guys. Have a great night, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
That was so fun.